Welcome, everyone, to Evolving Together with Christine Labbé, beyond the diagnosis into a new realm of possibilities. Your child deserves to be seen, heard, valued, and celebrated exactly as they are. Hi, I'm Christine, founder of Evolve Movement, a pediatric neuromovement practitioner, conscious parenting coach, and author of Our Superpowers, celebrating differently abled kids and their siblings. I offer new insights, understanding, and expansion that empower you to support your child in a way that is aligned with their soul's potential. You are not limited to the stories you've been taught to believe. You can write your own narrative. It takes 28% of parents with a neurodiverse child to awaken and advocate for change to start seeing progress. Be the change you want to see and take the first step towards a new future. Evolving Together starts now. Welcome to Evolving Together, where we delve into the possibilities beyond your child's diagnosis. I'm your host, Christine Labbé, and today I have the honor of sitting down with an incredible guest, Susan Baker. Susan is the author of A Life Beyond Words, a profoundly moving book that not only chronicles her journey as a mother, navigating the complexities of raising a child with autism, but also her experience of deep grief after losing her second son, James. This book is powerful in more ways than one. While you get to witness the transformation of a family, you get to uncover the beautiful gifts that live within a non-speaking autistic boy. For a moment, you get to see life through his lens, understand what he truly values, and realize how different that can be from what we often value. Most of all, you get to learn from this wise soul about true purpose and the deeper meaning of life. You get to remember through his words who we truly are and why we are here. I couldn't put the book down. I'm so excited to dive into this conversation with Susan. Whether you're a parent, caregiver, or simply curious about the powerful connections we can create with our children beyond words, this episode is sure to resonate with you. Welcome back to Evolving Together. I'm so excited to have Susan Baker with us today. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So I'm so excited to talk about your book, and I thought we could start by having you tell us your story so that people who are listening in, who have not read your book yet, can get a sense of your journey.
Okay. It's always where to begin, right? So thanks, Christine. And this is the book, A Life Beyond Words. And the title says it all. It gives me goosebumps, actually, because in reflection, as a mother of 16 years now, and as a woman in her late 40s, I can look at this life and call it a life beyond words. My journey began as a holistic health practitioner and before kids. And I really walked that talk, and it transformed my life. We continue to live that kind of holistic, natural lifestyle today. And when I became a mother, of course, I continued on that path, very much adopting an all-natural pregnancy outlook. Labor and delivery was all natural. I raised my firstborn child, Andrew, all natural, so there were no drugs and all homeopathic and natural medicines, all home cooked meals, organic, etc. And the reason I'm sharing this is because at one point along the path of my journey as a mother, I had to pivot. I had to learn to let go, that I could no longer control every single piece of this child's path. And I'll get to that in a moment. When Andrew was about 2 years old, we started to notice atypical development. At the time, though, I was pregnant with our second child. Our second child, through an ultrasound, was diagnosed with severe complication. My husband and I chose to continue on that path of delivering our baby boy, James, believing that we would, deal with whatever life presented to us. Unfortunately, James's complications were greater than his body could sustain. And after a week of his precious life, full term baby, we had to let him go. We had to truly set him free. And so he passed away at 1 week old. Um, and of course, that became a hugely significant part of my journey as a mother and our journey as a family. Um, at that time, however, Andrew was just over 2 years old. And I went into his pediatrician's office and I said, listen, I would love you to tell me I'm just a grieving mother and I'm hypervigilant and I'm seeing things that aren't there. And the doctor said, I can't say that. I'm seeing some markers of autism. And so by the time Andrew was 4 and I'd lost this child and I was pregnant with another, Andrew was diagnosed with what they called severe nonverbal autism. And so that was the start of my motherhood journey, Christine. I mean, it was a lot. And I know you and so many mothers relate to this path of challenge and grief and loss. Maybe not exactly my path, but in some way. We connect to this feeling of helplessness, I think, as parents, as mothers, and wanting so desperately to do everything right for your child. And so, I mean, the details are in the book and it'll come out in this conversation with you. But shortly after Andrew was diagnosed with autism, I realized that, I was feeling alone and that this journey was harder than I had anticipated, than I had expected. And so I had to go through this period of personal examination, and it became a transformational process for me as a woman, as a human. And it was not overnight. Um, After my baby girl was born, Abby, and she's now 12 and Andrew is 16, um, we grew into this life together as a family, but it wasn't easy. And I'll never forget the one moment with my husband. It was not an easy conversation. It was about what are we doing with Andrew? And he was having a really hard time. He doesn't speak, he didn't speak. And he would have been about 8 or 9, really tricky behaviors and sensitivities to his environment and just not happy in his body. And I was doing what I thought all the right things were, right? So here I am, this holistic trained nutritionist practitioner, giving him all these supportive remedies and therapies. And we were doing all sorts of different things, movement therapy, brain body therapy, holistic medicine, just to really support his body, not necessarily to fix, but to really support him. And in this conversation with my husband, my husband says, I don't know that any of it's working. And we don't know how to help Andrew. And I'm yelling, I've got nothing left. I don't know what to do. It was a really difficult conversation. And we talked about, do we need to separate? Do we need to live in different homes? What's best for our whole family? And long story short, I mean, it's a long story, but in that moment where I'm crying and I fell to my knees on the kitchen floor after this argument with my husband, I realized I had nothing left. I had nothing left emotionally, mentally, even the tools in my toolkit, I felt depleted. And I had nothing except to throw my hands up and say, I surrender. And I realized that it was the freedom I gave myself in that moment that would end up opening doors for me and for Andrew in the months and the years to come. But it was only through that vulnerable moment of realizing I had to let go. And I know you and I will talk about that process of surrender because it's not a passive process. It's not giving up. In fact, it's very actively acknowledging that it's not all about you in your life, right? And can you be open to what life might present to you?
Yes, it's very much about receiving,
Hmm.
right? Being in that space of allowing to receive whatever message, whatever, hunch, whatever intuition is going to lead you in the right direction. And I feel like it was right at that moment when you surrendered where things really turned around for you. And I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit because this was a true turning point where you really started to discover, Andrew's beautiful and magnificent gifts. And I really want people to hear about that because it's so
Okay.
important.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it wasn't as graceful as that either, really. Like it wasn't as though I surrendered and then I heard answers and I had direction and it just wasn't as seamless as that. And I think maybe that was the gift of it all, was that I had to be in that messy, undone place, which was
Mm,
very difficult for Susan, very, very difficult for me because I wanted to have it all figured out. Why? Because it would reduce anxiety, stress in our home, everybody would be happier. And yet I was pushing up against this. It wasn't flowing, it wasn't happening. So, in that dark space of surrendering and letting go, because that's all I had, I still had to sit in that void
mm,
of nothingness. And if you've ever been in that place, it's really uncomfortable.
yeah.
It's awful. And answers didn't come right away. But because I had nothing else, I had to sit in that space. And honestly, it gives me goosebumps to this day to talk about it because in the months that unfolded after that surrender, we were presented with a tool for Andrew that we weren't even looking for. I
Mm,
didn't even know existed. And I promise the reason it was presented to us, when things come across your path that you're not looking for, I believe it's because you were open enough to receive it.
yes.
And I think had I been so tightly held to that path I thought I should have been on, this will be the child who drops their diagnosis. This will be the child that quote unquote recovers from autism. I heard about these types of scenarios. Christine, that wasn't our path. And I had to let that go in order to be open to receive what would become our path. And so it was in those months following the deep surrender where we were presented with this tool called the letterboard. And I've got it, I'm holding it up here. Listeners won't be able to see it, but it's a very basic tool, an A to Z alphabet letterboard. And there's a whole system of training behind it. The parents or the communication partner sits with the child and they learn all the steps for communicating in this way. It is not as easy as expecting your child to sit in front of an alphabet and point to letters and spell out their life. It doesn't go like that. But my husband and I, when we learned about this tool, specifically called Spelling to Communicate, that's the training we had. My husband was the one who said, "What have we got to lose? A bit of time and a bit of money, and nothing in comparison to the hours and hours and thousands of dollars we'd already spent on classic autism therapies."
Mm,
And so we jumped in and we were anxious and we were nervous. Would this really work for our child? We'd never taught him how to spell, let alone read or communicate in this way. And it was a slow process. But after about a year of training on this method, Andrew started to share the depths of who he was. From what his favorite color was, which of course I'd always wondered, what his favorite foods were. Did he love the music that we listened to? But also his thoughts, his opinions, and some deep, for Andrew, deep and soulful sharings that really blew us away. And that was the truth of his personality really coming out. And I mean, is incredible. It has absolutely changed our life, this tool. And I could go on and on about that, particularly to say to families, let's not ever rule our kids off, or rule any forms of support, communication, therapy out just because we think it may not work for our child. Let's give ourselves and them the benefit of the doubt. Um, but also for me, Christine, this letterboard became an example of what happens when we allow life to lead us, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and our children to lead us. Because it has absolutely just opened our minds to everything we did not know about Andrew and about non-speaking autism.
You know, it's so interesting because it's like moving out of living from that lens of limitation when we look at our child, or we're even told our child
Mm.
has all these limitations, moving into a space of possibilities.
Oh, I
What
love
is
that.
possible of who they are, of
Yes.
what they have to share with the world. And I mean, I want everyone to pick up your book because the wisdom that
hmm
Andrew shares is just so beautiful. You
hmm
know, it speaks to so many things that we think we know. We think we know, but we're not sure. And then he says it, and it just feels like, oh, yes, this is truth. You know, this is absolutely truth. And he says it in such a beautiful way. You know, when he speaks about energy and when he speaks of just feeling nature and what he hears and just his experience. And I would love for you to speak to that a little bit about what his experience is and his sensitivities and the beauty in it, right? All these things that we can't hear, that we can't see, that we don't really get to enjoy yet, and all these things that he does. And just if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yes, and if he was here, he would quickly say, but you all have access to this same appreciation of life and nature and all of the insight that he shares. It's
Mm-hmm.
just that we are too busy. We're busy looking elsewhere, we're busy in our lives, we're not as tuned in. And for a child like Andrew, whose sensory world is so overwhelmed, I think he's learned how to filter and be in a moment because he's had to. And he's plugged into the things that serve him. And he has had to let go of all the things that have stressed him. I mean, it's very, very hard. It's still a very challenging life for him and for the people who support him. But he is the first to say, and he'll almost say it in a coy way, like looking at me like, Mom, you know this to be true. We all have access to what he calls universal knowledge or,
Mm-hmm.
or soulful wisdom. He says, I am just more tuned into it because you're distracted by other things in life. And so yes, he is a very soulful guy and he is plugged into nature. He talks and writes about nature a lot. He writes about soulful things, I would call it. I will say he's got friends who use the letterboard as well, and each of them, they have a different personality. So Andrew is very soulful and nature-based by just how he is. Other kids, they're maybe funnier, or they like to crack jokes. Um, they may not write as much about soulful things as Andrew does, and I think that's a really important piece because um, Andrew's wisdom is absolutely incredible. I would never want any other families of a child with a disability or an autistic child to say, well, that's just not my child. Like, that's just not going to be what my child. Well, don't assume anything, but also, again, let's give our children the benefit of possibility. What might they want to tell you? What might they want to share? Right? Andrew happens to be sharing this beautiful, soulful wisdom. I do believe most, if not all, of our children who are differently abled, disabled, whatever label you want to give them, offer us all the opportunity to see things differently,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Andrew has done that for us. I just happen to be his scribe. But he is, he's sharing wisdom that, exactly as you said, resonate as truth for most of the people who read his words. There's
Yeah.
absolutely something to it. Yeah.
And it's such a transformative journey for you because even when you look at your journey from the beginning up until the moment when he started sharing that wisdom, would you say that you were more in a space of receiving even the wisdom that he was wanting to share, where you would have been more in a space of understanding it after everything you had been through?
Yes, I hear what you're saying. I think that I was more open to receiving it, but also there was no denying it. It was like these are truths that I've always known to
Mm.
be true. And I've read them in books, and I've loved to receive that kind of insight and inspiration. But when it comes from your child who is non-speaking, from whom you would not expect it, in some way, and Andrew writes this, in some way we pay more attention, because he says, because you didn't expect it from me. Look at me. I'm by definition severely autistic. You might still, if you were to meet him on the street, think, oh my gosh, this is the same guy who writes this incredible wisdom, and yet he appears to be in his own world. He would say he's connected with other things that are more amusing, like the leaves and the frequencies of nature is what he's paying attention to. And so I think on some level, it was right in front of me. The wisdom that he's presenting to me is literally right in front of me. And so I can't not see it, because I also marvel at the fact that he's able to communicate this out to me, to us.
Yes, and I find it so interesting, just his own experience. And we won't deny that it's difficult, right? Because he is feeling and sensing everything, and it can be very, very overwhelming, and the sounds can be overwhelming, and that can be very difficult for him. But the fact that he's able to tune in the ways that he can with nature, it's so healing. I mean, it's such a healing experience. And I remember in your book, he said that, we were busy with other things such as, I believe he said something about competition and all of these other things. And he mentioned, whereas I'm more interested in the things that matter, which
Yes.
he speaks a lot about love and
Yes.
compassion.
Yeah.
And so perhaps you could speak to that a little bit more, because he
Yeah.
says the word love comes up a lot for
Oh,
Andrew in
yes.
the book.
Well, yeah, and like a lot of the spiritual teachers and spiritual books I've read, um, and any religion, I mean, really, that's what this comes down to, is we're here for love. We're here to be love. We are here to offer love. We're here to receive love. And he strips that down. Andrew writes, that's all really that matters. And love is a high vibrational place. And that's the place and the space that Andrew lives in.
Mhm.
Particularly when his body is supported, when he is able to be out in nature. He has most trouble when he is caught in our world. He calls it a very dense world. And
Mm.
so what the outsider might see would be what people would call behaviors, right? So he's frustrated, he's biting his shirt, he's acting out, he's throwing things, he looks distressed and dysregulated. And later he might write, that's because, I needed to be outside, or I didn't like overhearing that conversation about gossip, or, the vibe that those people are giving off just felt really heavy for me. That's the stuff that Andrew picks up. And so he shows by example that being out in nature and spending more time in those higher vibrational spaces of the emotions like joy and love and compassion and empathy, um, feels better, right? Versus what he calls the dense and competitive and comparative world that most of us live in. And he also writes, he's here to teach us, and that is an example of that. So as parents, we could have been really caught up and frustrated in what life with Andrew looks like. But because of this journey, my husband and I have both had to step back to say, okay, but can we see things in a different way? Can we see what it might be like for Andrew? And do we all benefit? And the answer is yes. And so when he writes something like, I'm here to teach others, he's not writing that from an ego place.
Mm-mm.
It comes from this place of, it actually is kind of tongue in cheek, because I usually ask him what he wants to learn at school, because he is in a mainstream school situation, in a supported class for kids with different abilities. And so every September I ask him, what do you want to get out of this year? I know that, you know, they don't necessarily teach spiritually based courses at your high school, but is there something you might want to learn? And he quickly writes, credits and courses don't matter to me. I am here to teach you, And I'm like, oh my gosh, Andrew, I get that, but what do you want to learn? What? And so, yeah, that's the place he comes from, is through his challenges, but through that and through his perspective, what can we learn from that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he speaks, I remember in the book, he talks about growth and that each of you within your family, James included, that you all came together in this life and that everyone had a purpose. Even if James's life was so short, it had meaning, it had an impact, it had a purpose. And that all of you came together to grow as souls. And I remember reading that in the book that he mentions this. Maybe you want
Yes.
to talk about that a little bit.
Yes. Oh my goodness, that was a very profound moment for me. So actually, as we're recording this, right now, Christine, October of 2024, it's the 14-year anniversary of the loss of James, almost to the day. And about 2 years ago at this time, I sat with Andrew with his letterboard, and I wanted to ask him something else, maybe about sibling relationships. And then I stopped in my tracks and I said, Andrew, this is the time of year when James was born and when he passed away many years ago. And I said, you were only 2 years old. Can I ask you about that? And there's a beautiful chapter in the book that writes out everything Andrew wrote, and it brought tears to my eyes and such wisdom about the soul connection that exists between those of us in our lives that are so close, and that it is all so purposeful. And Andrew wrote rhetorically almost, would you not agree, Mom, that James's 1 week taught you your strength and your vulnerability? And that is absolutely what that life with James, that 1 week in the NICU, and that whole process taught my husband and I, was our strength. And not to put a gold star on strength, I mean, part and parcel with strength is vulnerability. And so James's short life taught me, yes, my strength, but also it's okay to be weak and vulnerable. This is the human experience. And I think that 1 week with James set us up for the path that was ahead. You
Mhm.
know, the years that were very difficult with Andrew, the years before the letterboard, the birth of my daughter Abby, the evolution of our family. Um, Seeing that Abby, her birth and her life was the light after dark, and could we have and hold that perspective and see that life presents this to us after periods of pain? Is there joy there for us if we're willing to receive it? So, yeah, that was pretty significant what Andrew wrote about James, but also just about all of us in our journeys in this life and how we are connected as souls spiritually, and that we are here to teach each other different aspects of life and our soul's journey.
I think it's so important to mention because there are so many parents here that are going to have different children with different diagnoses. My daughter has Rett syndrome, and we've been through a lot. As you know, my daughter almost passed away last year.
Mhm.
And so, but each and every moment teaches us, and we grow through the experience. And however our child presents themselves in their physical body, it doesn't matter because the whole purpose and meaning of life is that growth, is that expansion, is coming together and teaching each other and learning together as souls. And
Mhm.
that every life has an impact and every life is meaningful, right? Because a lot of people might say, and society might say, well, your child is non-ambulatory or, can't use their hands intentionally or is non-speaking.
Hmm.
And they may look at them as lesser.
Hmm.
That is so far from what they are. In fact, they
Hmm.
are these magnificent human beings who are actually going through a very difficult human life, having
Hmm.
to experience, having to understand, well, where do I belong?
Hmm.
And, having to learn how to connect with people without words, right?
Yes.
Which
Yes.
actually ends up being so much more profound and so much
Yes.
deeper of a connection. But they're coming in that way, and we have to learn that as parents. Maybe you want to speak to that a little bit because,
Yes.
for you, you had to learn what does it feel like to learn how to speak just in being present to another, to feel
Yes.
their energy. I know Andrew talks about this in the book, but I wanted you to talk about it a little bit because for parents, it's a learning curve for us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because we're moving from one way of living, our conditioning, our beliefs, and then we're transforming into a whole other way of being in
Yes.
life.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you said it so beautifully. And I literally just wrote this in a note on my phone. I don't know if you do that, Christine, but sometimes I'm out in nature, probably with Andrew or on a walk on my own, and these words come to me and I quickly jot them down. And I wrote, this is a recalibration of what it means to be in communication with another human. And it is beyond words.
Mhm.
I think in our society, we prioritize words. We're a speaking community. And so, we give I'm going to speak just specifically to the autism community. We give our children these tools. Here's a picture and word system of communication. Here's an app on an iPad with voice output and words, and you can communicate in this way. Even the significant tool of the letterboard, which has absolutely changed our life and Andrew's, is all about production of words. But it's through my journey with Andrew where, after all the significance of this letterboard came through, I still was able to look at Andrew and say, but the richness and the value of your life is beyond words.
Mhm.
And who are we as parents, as communities, as society to decide the value of another life? And I mean, right now, there's so much progressive conversation around race and gender and, sexuality and culture and all of that. But part of that conversation needs to be the disability community. It's often forgotten, right? Which is there is value in each life in this world. And who are we to say one is more valuable than another? And it is not an easy path. Any family, any parent of a child with a disability knows that to be true. And sometimes I hear words like you and I are sharing, and I think, oh my gosh, it sounds so great, but man, it's hard, right?
It is
You
hard.
know, it's hard. Um, I think the gift of these conversations is that we realize we're not alone, and that I think as humans, we yearn for that hope. We yearn for these beautiful conversations because why not? That's what can carry us through. It carries us out of the depths of our darkness. That's what it did for me. I always allow myself those dark places. But I land in conversations like this because this is what I believe life offers us. These beautiful gifts and opportunities to learn what really matters. And I see that in my son, Andrew, and I see that in my daughter, Abby, and in the loss of James, right? This is the value of being human, and it is beyond words. It is about connecting to that more subtle, that deeper place that's within all of us if we stop long enough, right? To actually connect into that place.
Right. And you say it's hard. And I think it's important for us to mention this, right? Because you're right. We do talk about it like this beautiful, magical journey. And the truth is, we get to this place of being able to see it as it is and appreciate the beauty in it. But there is a journey, a path that we take that leads us there.
Yeah.
And it's hard, it's difficult, it's extremely transformative. There are many moments that were very uncomfortable,
Yes. Yeah.
right? And so I think it's important perhaps to talk about that for you, some of those pivotal moments that shifted you, or moments when you started to really tune in to those deeper parts of yourself. Perhaps share a little bit about your journey, some things that helped you, because many parents are looking and they're thinking, oh, this sounds wonderful, but I don't even know where to start. I don't even know
Mhm.
how do I even start walking down this path? So
Yeah.
maybe you could share a bit about your path.
Um, it's such a good point. I mean, it's so cliche to say you can't pour from an empty cup, and we need to take care of ourselves. I think, and I'm going to speak for me personally, it's easier said than done. And I wish I had beautiful pearls of wisdom to pass on to every mother or every parent that needs it. It doesn't look like that for me. The number one mantra I adopted was to keep showing up. That's my number one. That's all I got, which is, in every moment and in every day, can I keep showing up? And what does that look like? It looks different every time. It means getting out of bed. And if, in the depths of my grief of the loss of James, there was one morning I remember I was in bed and I looked out the window and I thought, what if I didn't get up? What if I didn't get out of bed? What's the worst that would happen? Well, Andrew wouldn't eat. My husband would have to come home from work. I mean, it was an awful scenario, to be honest. But I allowed myself that moment. And I think that's one thing we can do as humans is to allow ourselves the the depths and the range of our emotional experience.
Mhm.
Because I was able to give myself that place, that dark place, but it didn't last. It didn't last forever, and I did get out of bed, and I keep showing up. I say that example because I see that in many places in my life, and I see that in the lives of others, other parents, yours as well, is one foot in front of the other, can we keep showing up? It doesn't have to be a big glamorous day. It's one day at a time, one moment at a time, and I really believe that's what gets me through. I have other tools, Christine, like every morning I write in a 5-minute journal. I write what I'm grateful for, 3 things that I'm grateful for, 3 things I would love for the day, 3 things I loved about yesterday. And I have that practice, and I think it anchors me in. I try to spend moments in stillness, right? Where the phone is away. I've got 5 minutes and I can actually just sit and breathe and reconnect with myself. It doesn't always happen, but that's a powerful tool. Being out in nature, sometimes forced because of my children, but I realize the benefit of that. And so that's another tool. Connecting with like minds, going out and having fun. Um, doing things that I might have felt were selfish for me, in the end, I realize is actually self-care, it's self-love. So, but again, it goes back to, can I give myself permission to just keep showing up? Yeah.
Yes, and you mentioned a good point about feeling all of the emotions, whether they're difficult emotions, whether they're joyful emotions, to feel them all and to really be present to our human experience. I think that's a very, very important point
Hmm.
because sometimes on this journey we have a tendency to want to protect ourselves, and so we suppress and we
Yes.
don't want to feel
Yeah.
because some of us may feel like we might drown in our feelings or we're
Hmm.
afraid of our feelings. So
Hmm.
we kind of keep moving, keep trekking, keep pushing forward, but we're not really feeling what's going on. We're not really moving through it. We're not really healing.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so what you say, speaks to the healing occurring throughout the journey as you moved along. You were constantly feeling your feelings, allowing yourself to heal. And you're very, very honest in your book. You talk about everything that you felt. And I think that's
Hmm.
important for parents to read to see, oh, okay, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
I'm not alone in feeling this way.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's so hard that you just don't feel like you can keep going, but you
Yes.
can. And I just feel like you write so beautifully in your book about your experience from beginning to end, and we can really feel everything you're going through and moving through even your transformation throughout the book.
Hmm.
So I
Yes.
think
Well,
that's the
and
point.
it's not linear, and it's not even that, okay, you go through the darkness and then you get up and you're in the good place. You're at the
Oh,
top of the mountain. I mean, you read the book, you know that it's up and down, it's up and down.
yeah.
And but it's different every time. And what I can see now in hindsight, particularly having written the book of our story, is that life will continue to look like that. But every lesson and every little gem that comes forward will be different every time. And can we allow for that? Can we allow that we won't have it all figured out, even by the end? But that's part of this journey called life, is surrendering into that and allowing for what comes, knowing and trusting that will be able to keep showing up, and we will be able to pull from those experiences some of the gifts that are there for us. I also want to touch on, my default is to always feel purposeful. I'm always pushing in order to, well, this has to count, or this should matter, or what am I doing? And I think, again, if we can surrender into just allowing life, we learn our purpose through that, but also that our purpose as humans is beyond that kind of production mode. And I'm going to read Andrew's words, something he wrote. Um, it's at actually, the very end of the book. It's a final word. And I asked him about purpose. And he said, I think most of us want to believe that our life has purpose. But just being here means our life has purpose. We just forget. Of course, we all want to feel purposeful, but our number one purpose is to be love. I mean, that's so profound
It is. It is.
because he's right. And this is what all the spiritual gurus have ever told us. And then he goes on to say, so how can you show up as love in your life? Is it being loving to someone who you find hard to love? Is it by forgiving someone? What about to yourself? How do you need to love yourself more? How do you need to show yourself love?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I mean, that's really what it's about, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
And again, I laugh with him and I say, Andrew, how do you know all this? Where does this come from? And he looks at me as though, but this is what you believe to be true too. This is everything we all know to be true. He just happens to be echoing it for us to hear.
Yeah, and it's almost like we've all forgotten, but he's so tuned in, as you said, right? That he just remembers.
Yes.
And it makes me think that there are so many of our children, so many of these kids that are non-speaking that do remember. I mean, I can say that my daughter is very wise. I can feel it. I don't
Hmm.
need her to tell me. I
Hmm.
feel it. And, she shares it in her eyes or even in the things that she's interested in. You can see that there's depth there, that
Yes.
there's so much depth beyond anything you would ever think would interest, a
Yes.
10-year-old.
Yes.
And so,
But and even regardless of that, what it brings out in you is so
yes.
beautiful, because being in the presence of your daughter brings you to this heart opening place. I know that. I see that in your writing and I see that in your photos. I have a good friend as well whose son is as well, very physically disabled and doesn't speak. And it brings out this incredible beauty in his mother, which then, of course, translates to everyone in her life. So Andrew writes, I'm going to read this because it's exactly what we're talking about. He writes,
Yes, please.
make no mistake, my life is full of challenge living in this world. It is full of sensory obstacles to overcome and is full of busy people disconnected from their source. I was born knowing I am a child of creation and have remained connected to what matters. Love, compassion, forgiveness are what matter most. Living in a world where people are only just coming to remember that this is what life is all about is hard. It is like I'm the only one seeing life in its true colors, an amazingly rich world, but lonely sometimes. It's exactly what you said. It's all of us remembering.
Yes. Yes, and there is something to be said also about the profound connection that occurs when our children are non-speaking,
Hmm.
because we learn how to be present to another. We learn how to tune into their essence. We learn to feel what it's like to be with them in
Hmm.
silence. And I know
Hmm.
Andrew says this in the book, that he would just love for people to just be present with him in silence, in his
Yes.
silence, right?
Yes.
And this beauty in feeling another. I know he talks about that in the book. I think it's really important. I know we don't have much more time, but I definitely think it's an important point to bring up because, as a neuromovement practitioner, I work with a lot of children that are autistic, and this desire to be felt is
Hmm.
extremely important. I think people need to know this, that these children want to be felt because
Hmm.
they are high vibration. I mean, if you really tune into them, they have such a beautiful energy. And when they're happy, they will uplift an entire room,
Hmm.
with that beautiful energy that they have. And
Hmm.
this is really what I've felt for many years, is that they just want us to feel it, and they know when we do. They know
Yes.
there's so much happening
Yeah.
beyond the words, as you say, when we're
Hmm.
just connecting.
Hmm.
Everything that is spoken just between the energy of one
Yes.
and the other, there's so much happening there. And I just want you to talk about that a little bit,
Yes.
because it's in the book. And I think it's important for parents to understand there's so much they can explore with their child.
Yes. Yes, and it does take slowing down in order to get to that place, it can be frustrating. I think, "Oh, I know exactly what I need to be doing in this moment, but I feel too busy." But
Mhm.
Andrew forces me sometimes, certainly when he was younger, to stop and plug into what he's trying to communicate. I'm gonna read one other thing that he wrote here. "The hardship of living in this body is also the gift. It is awful at times, but is also the way for my soul to gain what it is here to learn: compassion for those who experience the world in ways different from me. And of course, unconditional love for myself and for others." I mean, that statement is for all of us, right?
Mhm.
It's for all of us to experience the world and to have compassion for those who experience the world in ways different from me, and whether the child is non-speaking, has a disability, is an autistic child who speaks, is a spouse who speaks. I mean, what I've learned because of Andrew is that it is beyond words, right? Christine, you and I both know that. So, can we be with another human and be in the experience of who they are without speaking? Because there's so much that is communicated through that. There's so much richness, there's so much to learn about somebody without the words, right? And
Yes.
you feel that through your practice. I know that. And I agree that we all want to be felt in that way. It's just that these tricky souls in tricky bodies, beautiful souls in tricky bodies, are the ones that are forcing us, teaching us to learn how to do that, right? And then we take that to all these other relationships in our life.
And do you imagine how meaningful and purposeful those lives are? How
Mm,
transformative they are. I mean, I
yeah.
have goosebumps when I say this because, we really need to look at these children from a very
Yes.
different lens. I even want to cry, That's
And can
an
we
that's
spend,
amazing purpose.
yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's right there for all of us. Can we spend time with these people who, as Andrew writes, present themselves differently? Can we spend time with the disabled, with people who don't speak, with people who don't hear, with people who can't move their bodies? Can we spend some time there? I think all of us feel awkward about that. It's uncomfortable. It's slow. It's different than what we're used to. But you and I know, and I take Andrew's word for it literally, that there is so much to gain from being in the presence of those who live a different life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Susan. I appreciate this conversation so much. I loved it. I want to offer you an opportunity perhaps to share some last words with the listeners, if there's anything you'd like to share before we close.
Thank you, Christine, even for this conversation. Absolutely. No, the message is really, from a place of empowered living, can we give ourselves permission to keep showing up with no expectation or stranglehold on our life, but to really, lean into what life might be showing to us, the challenge and the joy that comes from that. Um, and there's real beauty waiting for us if we can do that. So yes,
Yeah.
yeah, no, thank you, Christine. I love this conversation as well, and it's been beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Susan.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Evolving Together. Susan's story reminds us of the beauty and depth that can be found in every human connection, especially those we experience beyond words. If you'd like to learn more about Susan's journey and the wisdom she shares, I encourage you to pick up a copy of her book, A Life Beyond Words. Subscribe to her blog or follow her on social media. The links are below. And as always, I hope this conversation leaves you feeling inspired, more connected to your own journey, and empowered to show up with love and compassion in every moment. Until next time, keep evolving and creating those deeper connections with yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for listening. You've been listening to Evolving Together with Christine Labbé, beyond the diagnosis into a new realm of possibilities. Tune in every second Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific Time or 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Transformation Talk Radio for more insights, understanding, and expansion that empower you to support your child in a way that is aligned with their soul's potential. Your child deserves to be seen, heard, valued, and celebrated exactly as they are. Are you ready to be the change you want to see for your neurodiverse child? Take the first step towards a new future and visit www.christinelabbe.com or check out our collective site, www.evolvemovement.ca.